Helena Rubinstein created the first massive global cosmetics corporation, but that business started its life in Melbourne in 1903. She lived in Australia from 1896. She was born in occupied Poland, and she came as an unaccompanied migrant in 1896 and spent 10 years living here. Her idea for the business must have come fairly early. At the end of her life, she was inclined to say that, you know, the hot desert wind of outback Australia inspired her to adapt her mother's face cream. And that may well have been partly true, but it doesn't really explain quite how she managed to do so much. So she came to Australia to join her mother's siblings, 3 uncles, also Polish Jews, who had a mixed business in Coleraine in the Western District of Victoria. And of course it's sheep country, and she seems to have been able to figure out that lanolin would improve the product that she brought with her from Poland. Coleraine and the Western District of Victoria were sliding at that time into the Great Federation drought, which was a calamity because it decimated sheep production, upon which Australia relied. It's a mixed period of tremendous ambition and confidence arising from the fact that Australia, a newly federated Commonwealth, was nevertheless going to continue to be a linchpin in the British Empire. So there's that. But at the same time, all over the country, there is drought, there is the lingering effects of the great financial collapse of the early 1890s. And so it's a really interesting time to find a single Jewish woman starting a business, and a business, moreover, employing women and providing a product that was intended to benefit women. Well, I actually quite like the smell of lanolin. If you go into a working shearing shed, that's the smell of lanolin. But it was thought to be, it was thought necessary to counteract the natural smell of lanolin with cheap perfume. It's very hard to tell really how she presented on the voyage or upon arrival. She does seem to have been very self-confident. She certainly arrived with little or no English and spent some months as a single adult in a classroom of small children in Coleraine. So she's also very unusual in the sense that, like the future Sidney Myer and his brother, Helena Rubinstein was a migrant coming direct from Eastern Europe and not coming through Britain or any kind of prior assimilation experience, which was the most common source of Jewish migration to Australia then. She called her product valets. We don't know why. All efforts to find some kind of literary or associative prompt have unfortunately come to naught. But she did register the trademark at the beginning of her business. And the trademark was the label copy, which was in the Polish language, valets with phrases describing the product's usefulness in Polish. In a way, valets is the fulcrum of her story. It purported to have been formulated by a Hungarian or Russian or Polish skin specialist or doctor or scientist called Dr. Joseph Lekuski. And this exotic backstory is present in all of her publicity, and it in many ways drives the marketing of this product. The prosaic reality was that the product was run up for her with the aid of the firm of Felt and Grimwade around the corner in Flinders Lane, and consisted largely of lanolin, but I mean the exotic backstory allowed her to say that there were herbs that only grow in the Carpathian Mountains and the bark of an evergreen tree, and all of this nonsense. And I suppose what makes Helena Rubinstein's achievement so special is that she was able to create, from a very simple and inexpensive product, one that purported to be exotic, desirable, and expensively imported. She had a number of insights. One, that women were prepared to pay for luxuries, and two, that the supply chain could, when it was reliable, could be depended upon to supply numerous cities in Australasia, all over, within 18 months of starting in one room in Elizabeth Street. Helena Rubinstein comes home to Melbourne, or rather establishes herself in Melbourne after a year in Toowoomba. And she does that as a way of preparing the business. And she works, while she's preparing her business, as a waitress in two establishments in the city of Melbourne. She has premises, 3 sets of premises in quick succession in Melbourne before she expands interstate. And she is in Sydney and Brisbane by 1904, within 18 months, and very shortly afterwards expands into 5 New Zealand cities. Helena Rubinstein could have launched herself upon London, for example, from Melbourne only, in theory. But she didn't do that. What she did was to achieve conquest all over Australia and New Zealand, and then simultaneously in 1907 expand into London and Paris simultaneously, and then within only a very short time to New York as well. Her product needed to work, and mostly it did. It needed to have an exotic backstory, and which was certainly bogus. She also perceived that it was advantageous for it to seem to be formulated under a clinical environment in a laboratory. And that was very new. And so the claim, for example, that she herself had studied medicine came into being, which was not true. The really tantalising part, however, is that we can't really say that she didn't know at least part of what she was doing in the laboratory. Ultimately, she had enormous plant and factories and so on. But the narrative was orchestrated, it was consistent, and it was always to do with Dr. Lekuski and the scientific basis upon which the product Falaise was formulated. So perhaps Helena Rubinstein's most radical achievement was to dream up the byline of "Beauty is Power," which was so unconventional and so successful. almost as soon as she returned to Europe, Helena Rubinstein became a fashion plate, and that process just ballooned through the 1920s and 30s and onwards. She became a global celebrity, an icon of glamour herself. The business relied upon her projection of her own glamour, even though she was only 4'10" in high heels.
What?
And
What? She was 4'10"?
yeah,
Wow.
in high heels. And she's painted by everybody. She is photographed by everybody. She is keeping company with Pablo Picasso, the whole Paris avant-garde, the Greenwich Village set, literary and Hollywood sets kind of gravitated towards her. She became again ahead of her time, really a manifestation of international glamour that we've become more used to, but which was very unusual then. Beauty is power is the one of the most fascinating and mysterious aspects of Helena Rubinstein's business. It was such an unusual and bold tag to apply. It was obviously successful, but it does raise the question, is beauty power? Should it be power? Power to what end? Why should women be obliged to seek the weaponization of beauty? These are quite fundamental questions, and they run to the core of her business. I don't have the answers, but it is true that beauty is power was genuinely revolutionary in 1903 when Helena Rubinstein started using it. It was totally unlike any other advertising tag or slogan in what was actually a quite crowded market that she was entering. Helena Rubinstein was the first self-made millionairess in the world, multi-millionairess. And although she didn't do it entirely unaided, she did most of it herself.